Hi, I'm WTOP film critic Jason Fraley, and all month long, I'm loving this. We're doing the best movies in every genre. 30 days, 30 genres. And today, we're going to break down my favorite fantasy movies. Now, this was one of the trickiest. Originally, when we were going to do top 10s in every genre and 64 different subgenres, which I admit is crazy. I'm glad I got a little pushback on that, actually. Originally, I had separated into two different fantasy type categories. One was fantasy, like you think, the otherworldly Lord of the Rings type movies. And the other, I had a separate category for magical realism fantasy, which is sort of like your Field of Dreams, extraordinary things happening in the real world. It felt weird to have Field of Dreams and Lord of the Rings in the same category, but ultimately when we condensed it down, it made more sense if with just one fantasy category. Now you'll get all of them. So first we'll talk about the sort of what you think originally as fantasies, sort of the otherworldly things, like the Lord of the Rings. Who doesn't love Gollum with My Precious? I mean, that's just iconic stuff. The trilogy was, I mean, it won Best Picture for Return of the King, the third one. But by then, I think it was almost like an Oscar to celebrate all three, because probably the first one might be my favorite. The second one has great battles. I mean, come on, Lord of the Rings was an instant classic. I think it was instantly iconic. We also get movies like Avatar, which I wasn't as big of a fan on. Yeah, could have been sci-fi too, but with the Na'vi there and all the blue creatures, I kind of I veered towards fantasy. Again, it's not one of my favorites, but it's the pop culture impact and one of the highest grossing movies of all time. I think you're being dishonest if you leave it off, so I put it in here on fantasy. Also, you get movies like Pan's Labyrinth, Guillermo del Toro's masterpiece. From Spain. I think, I mean, look at this. My list, this might be crazy. I did not include The Shape of Water, which is the reigning Best Picture champion. Obviously a fantasy, could have easily gone in here. But you know why I didn't? Because I personally, while I liked it, didn't love it, I thought it was a makeup Oscar for what should have won, which was Pan's Labyrinth, Del Toro's masterpiece. So I put that in here. Of course, the fan favorites like Harry Potter. I mean, come on, everyone, I mean, especially the cast, but we get to watch those kids grow up literally before our very eyes throughout all those movies, and the cast is so deep. Everyone, I think those movies really did J.K. Rowling's novels justice. They're just magical. I smile every time I think of it. Wingardium Leviosa, it's on the list. Also, Willy Wonka. Yeah, you could have put it in musicals, but I went with the fantasy elements with the Oompa Loompas, and they're floating through the air with the bubbles, and it's just great. I mean, Gene Wilder's definitely his most iconic role with you lose, sir. Good day. You get nothing. Then of course we have movies. Some foreign flicks like Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast. Everyone knows the animated movie, but this French masterpiece from the 40s is great. And check it out. Literally, we have teardrops that turn into diamonds for Belle, and then Gaston, who has a different name in this movie, but it's still him. It's the same idea. He has a different fate. Check it out. Check it out. Well, I'll just say it. He becomes the Beast. I think that's kind of cool. He has to learn the lesson next. I think that's kind of cool. And then, of course, Tim Burton. So many good fantasies like Big Fish, but the one I went with was Edward Scissorhands. It launched Johnny Depp's career. And while Burton might have made better movies in terms of Ed Wood, which we get into in the showbiz category, his best fantasy clearly is Edward Scissorhands. It's such a bizarre concept for a movie, but when he's cutting the ice sculptures and looks like it's snowing, I think it's so magical. I think it's Depp's most charming role. One movie that's missing from here that you could have easily put in is The Princess Bride. I ultimately put it in Adventures. Clearly, it could be a fantasy. The whole thing's a storybook. So if you're missing that, don't worry. Search the whole PDF. You can find the adventure. Honestly, there was fewer adventure movies than there were fantasies, so I put it in there to fit more on here. But Princess Bride, gotta love it. Inconceivable. It's in Adventures. Now, the other side of the equation we mentioned at the top of this is the magical realism category, which is extraordinary things happening in the ordinary world, which I have a huge soft spot for. For some, maybe it's because it's more relatable. It's in the real world that I can grapple with. Nothing against the far-off planets. It's just nothing that I could personally sit and come up with. It's crazy how they come up with those worlds. But it's a personal taste. But I really gravitate towards these magical realist things, like your Benjamin Buttons. It's in the real world, but he's aging backwards. Or Field of Dreams, one of my all-time favorites. I mean, we're in the real world, a real Iowa cornfield, and he hears a voice. If you build it, he will come. And he builds a baseball field for Shoeless Joe Jackson's ghost and all the other ghosts to come out of the cornfield and get to, play baseball as a penance for throwing the World Series back in the 1919. But of course, it's the father-son tale that gets me. I cry every time I watch this movie, not only because of James Earl Jones' speech and Burt Lancaster, I want to wrap my arms around the bag as Moonlight Graham, but to me, it's the end, man. It's the father-son. Hey, Dad, do you want to have a catch? I'm bawling like a baby every time. So Field of Dreams is a must for the magical realism part of the fantasy. You also get movies like Big. I mean, Tom Hanks is, a kid living in an adult body. Again, it's in the real world. F.A.O. Schwartz was an actual piano. It's a real world, but he's living almost like a 13 going on 30 kind of an ideal. And he's playing chopsticks with Robert Loggia. I mean, come on, who doesn't love that? We get some ghost stories and imaginary friends like Harvey. Jimmy Stewart thinks he sees an imaginary friend rabbit, and he says, "Hi, I'm Elwood P, Mr. Dowd." He's so sincere about it, but you actually want to believe he sees a rabbit. It's the lighter side of Donnie Darko. You get ghosts. Obviously, could have been in the romantic comedy or romantic category because of Unchained Melody, but I put it here. It's magical realist too. You get Whoopi Goldberg as the psychic trying to help Patrick Swayze's ghost, who's kind of caught in purgatory, to basically to catch his killer before he also harms Demi Moore. But the music in that's so great. Similar lines, Wings of Desire. It was remade by Hollywood as City of Angels with that Goo Goo Dolls song Iris, but it was originally in 1987 a German flick by Wim Wenders along the Berlin Wall. Again, a tale of angel coming down because he falls in love with a mortal. That also got here. The Seventh Seal. We have Max von Sydow in Bergman's masterpiece. He's a medieval knight playing chess, literally sitting in the real world playing chess with death, with the Grim Reaper. It's just a crazy idea, and it's probably Bergman's most iconic movie. I'm partial to Persona and Wild Strawberries, but come on, Seventh Seal is such a genius idea. It has to go in here. And then even movies like Amelie or The Red Shoes, I also snuck them in here because they definitely have magical realist qualities. I mean, Amelie, she's the ultimate prankster, and then ultimately learns to do good deeds, but she melts into a puddle on the floor. There's fantasy elements all through Amelie, and The Red Shoes as well, the Hans Christian Andersen tale, the Powell and Pressburger masterpiece, a ballerina that puts on a pair of ballerina ballet shoes, and they have a mind of their own. She can't stop dancing with great fantasy sequences. Those also made it here in fantasy. Now, the top three of this category was so hard because most of you, when you think fantasy, you're going to think of your Pan's Labyrinth and your Lord of the Rings, and I guarantee I'm going to get some comments saying, "You're crazy, those should be in your top three." But I've already sort of explained, I don't know why. I sort of lean more towards the magical realism stuff, but they're still fantasies, they count. I wanted to put Field of Dreams in the top three because I love it, but ultimately I put that at number 4. Number 3, Groundhog Day. I love this movie. It's one of those that, you're thinking, if you're going to try to be a screenwriter, you're like, why didn't I come up with this idea? The idea that Bill Murray would relive the same day over and over and over again in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, blah, blah, blah. I quote it all the time. He wakes up to the Sonny and Cher, "I Got You, Babe," every day on his alarm clock, and has this brilliant sequence where he's smashing it. Yes, you could be a romantic comedy, clearly. It's probably an underrated romantic comedy on that front. Because he and Andy McDowell have a great relationship, and how because he gets to live the same day over and over again, he starts off slimy, trying to use things she says about, "I always drink to world peace, so it's sweet vermouth on the rocks with a twist." He learns what she wants and then goes back and tries to slimily win her over. But again, that doesn't work. He ultimately can't get the girl until he learns to help other people. He learns to catch the kid that's falling out of the tree. He learns to play the piano. He saves the guy by giving him the Heimlich. There's so much good stuff here. It's one of the best magical realist fantasies ever. And man, Harold Ramis, rest in peace. You were a genius for coming up with this idea. Thank you so much for giving us Groundhog Day. Number 2, this is where it's going to be controversial, so get your slings and arrows ready, but I could not figure out where the heck else to put this magical realist classic that not everyone loves, but a lot of people love. Best Picture 94, top grossing movie of 94, Forrest Gump. Where do you put it? Is it really a fantasy? No, it's magical realist, I guess, but is it? You could have put it in drama. You could have put it in, but there's a lot of comedy. Could have put it in epics. You could have put it in so many other categories. Again, this was the one I had no idea where to freaking put Forrest Gump. And there's romance. Him and Jenny are like one of the best romantic couples ever. There's politics. It's so many different categories. Ultimately, I went here because when you stop and think about it, yeah, it's kind of a magical realist. Forrest shows up at the turning point of every part in American history. Similar, kind of like being there, the Peter Sellers, but more so in terms of being at the intersection of every different moment. He taught Elvis to dance. He called in Watergate. He invented famous catchphrases like "Have a nice day" and blank happens for bumper stickers. Like come on, like we know he didn't actually do all this, and no one man could do this. So the fact that he, or even all the presidents, being in the footage of all the different major moments in history, mooning LBJ, telling JFK he has to pee, all this different stuff, being a hero in Vietnam, the ping pong team, shrimp boat captain, all this stuff. I mean, that's where to me it fell more. As hard as it was, trust me, I had no idea. But to me, that's where I was like, I'll give it the edge for fantasy. Because let's face it, he's teaching Elvis to dance. He's calling in Watergate. That's fantastical. Plus, I just think it's Tom Hanks' most iconic role as Forrest Gump. He won his second Best Actor in a row after Philadelphia. A lot of people watch Jenny and they forget that it's Claire Underwood that's about to happen. You get Gary Sinise as Lieutenant Dan. Sally Field as the mom. I mean, I tear up. I totally get that it's polarizing. There was even a line in The Big Sick where Ray Romano's like, man, you go on the internet, there's people that hate Forrest Gump. How do they hate? Well, actually, a lot of people do. There's a lot of haters out there. I think because it edged out art masterpieces like Pulp Fiction and then underrated ones like Shawshank Redemption. Like there was a lot of great movies in '94, and the fact that Forrest Gump, I guess a lot of people say that it celebrates being a simpleton. Why would that win? I get your argument, I really do, but I got to tell you, it's my dad's favorite movie, and thus it was like clearly one of my favorites growing up, and still to this day. I'll toss it over to Ebert, who said, in his review, Roger Ebert, rest in peace, he said in his review that, as silly and magical and fantasy and all that it is, he said in the end it's deceptively profound, which I think when Forrest and Jenny, I think Jenny's represents a lot of, I guess, the counterculture of the 60s. Forrest maybe represents a little bit more of just the simple-minded conservative. Although he does a lot of things, stupid is as stupid does, and he does a lot of things that aren't necessarily conservative. I mean, he's mooning people. I mean, he's helping integrate schools. His best friend is an African-American in the Vietnam War. I mean, if you really go back and look at it, maybe it's not as simple to say Jenny liberal, Forrest conservative, but either way, them embracing in the reflecting pool during that protest rally, I think it's a cross-section of American history. It's Americana, kind of like a Frank Capra, if you will, but Robert Zemeckis, I'm giving him props on this. I know you might hate me. I know you might hate Gump. I love Gump. Number 2. Number 1, I mentioned Capra, It's a Wonderful Life. One of my all-time favorite movies, such so that every winter in Frederick, my hometown, we have It's a Wonderful Walk. We screen it at the Weinberg Center, and then we all run through the town of downtown Frederick, which I call my Bedford Falls, and we yell Merry Christmas to everybody. It's just a personal pick, but I know a lot of you love it too. It gets a reputation, obviously, as a Christmas classic, and for good reason. I mean, it opens and closes with that great holiday, cheer on Christmas Eve, and the great inspiration. But I almost think that reputation and the fact that it airs, every holiday on Thanksgiving and Christmas, I almost think that takes away from the legacy, and that's worded wrong. I think it makes other people underrated as a not serious movie because they think of Christmas movies. But no, I think it's deep. Like if you think other than the bookends on the holiday bookends, it really is kind of a 2-hour plunge into one man's contemplating suicide. I mean, it gets pretty dark. I mean, George Bailey is thinking of offing himself because his life hasn't turned out like he thought it would. He never got out of Bedford Falls like his brother, and he watched all these other and friends get out. He stays there. Has a he has some great romantic moments. With what is it, Mary? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it. Him and Donna Reed are so adorable. But that's the famous scene. But my favorite of theirs is when they go into the old abandoned house. It's dripping and his buddies are singing songs, and they've given all of their time and money away to save the run on the banks during the Great Depression. That they can't go on their actual honeymoon, but they have this honeymoon in this drippy abandoned house that they broke the windows in earlier when they were younger, and they have the record playing by the fireplace, and she says, when we broke those windows, George Bailey, this is what I wish for. I'm smiling the whole time. Steven Spielberg called it a five-hanky movie in terms of that end, when all of the people, that message of no man's a failure who has friends, when they all come back around and save him in the end, and they sing Auld Lang Syne. I mean, it's a five-hanky movie. I agree, Spielberg. I am like crying every time. It doesn't get old. Maybe it's too sentimental for some of you, but I'll happily fall on that sap sword for you. I love Frank Capra. There's a place for that Capricorn, I think. Maybe not every movie and not everyone on these lists, of course, but for me, you need It's a Wonderful Life. And of course, the reason it's a fantasy, it's that magical realist fantasy of, similar to Charles Dickens and Ebenezer Scrooge. He gets to have these ghosts of past, present, and future show him, all the different, phases of his life. But similarly, George Bailey gets, Clarence the Angel coming down and getting to show him the fantasy, magical realist idea of what Bedford Falls and what the world would look like had he had never been born. It's very similar. And for any of you, final point, any of you that would like to write it off as, a mainstream classic, a Capricorn that doesn't have any good directing techniques and isn't artistic, I beg you to reconsider one scene in particular. When George Bailey first jumps into the water to save Clarence, and they're in by the fireplace, there's the clothesline. They have their clothes. They're drying off. This is when we've entered the fantasy realm, actually. Look how Capra shoots it. We have a clothesline, which he had as the Walls of Jericho, and It Happened One Night. I love that movie. We'll get to that later. But look at the clothesline in this shot. We have George Bailey drying off underneath, and Clarence is standing above it. The angel is above the dividing line of the mortal and immortal worlds. George Bailey, the mortal, is down here. That, to me, I'm sorry, if you're film school buffs that talk about mise en scène, the symbolic layout and composition of the shot, if you look at that scene alone, there's other stuff throughout the movie, I promise you. If you can't call Capra not artistic, that right there, reminder that he's one of the best directors of all time. But to me, it's just one of my favorite, not only fantasies, one of my favorite movies, period, of all time. So, number one, favorite fantasy in the magical realism subsection. That still cracks me up. It's a Wonderful Life. Can't beat it. I love it. See my full top 25 fantasies on WTOP.com's entertainment page. Join our conversation on the blog and tell us what you think. And join us tomorrow as we break down one of my favorite genres, film noir.